Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I have a time lapse of an art journal that kind of came about in an odd way. This started out as this weird Rorschach looking drawing. Started out as a Inktober sketch. It was actually one of the failed decorative corn sketches, and I'd shut my art journal out of frustration, and when I opened it up I realized that this kind of would be cool as a girl. And looking at it now, actually it looks kind of like a Viking, like she has a big, like a horn helmet on. But when I was looking at it at first, I saw a little girl who had kind of birds flying around her, kind of like, you know, Cinderella. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if she was kind of having a daydream and she was thinking about all these birds flying around. So I sketched in with just like an elegant writer pen, just some facial features, thinking I was just going to keep it to ink. But I really quickly realized that I had too much going on in the background. I had like kind of fine sketchy lines from my first corn sketch, so I knew that I needed to do something to block that out. And so I just grabbed some acrylic paint and mixed up some kind of peachy tones and just blocked in the skin with that. I used a combination of unbleached titanium, flesh pink from Liquitex, some burnt sienna, and some vermilion. And I had actually had a mixture of brands there. And then I just started to kind of block in my skin tone and shadows and try to figure exactly how much hair I wanted over the forehead. And I liked the little bit of like purple and red ink showing through, and I wanted to keep some of that, but I honestly think I ended up going over most of that by the time I was done on the skin tones anyway. But it gave me a starting point, and that's what I really needed to kind of get going. And the hair looks kind of cool with all the different colors of ink showing through, but I did end up going over that with some paint. So I just wanted to kind of apologize for the fact that this is a time lapse. I'm not a very, I don't know if I'm not a very proficient art journaler, but I definitely need to think as I go and just kind of go the way that, just kind of let my mood take me. And I don't really go in a very linear fashion. Sometimes I end up redoing areas or overworking areas. And so to teach that kind of in real time, it would take a long time. This took me, I think the footage time was about 45 minutes, so it would be kind of boring, I think, to watch that. So I'm going in. I decided I was going to make her a redhead, since that's a color ink that I mostly had there. And I kind of sketched in some wonky eyebrows, which I'm going to end up painting over. But I really was happy the way that I placed the features. It kind of is foreshortened a little bit, like she's looking down. And I thought that was a really sweet, kind of innocent look, and very youthful. And I just really liked that whole the whole idea of being lost in a daydream, or maybe she's looking down at a book and reading, and that's what she's imagining. That's what's happening in the book. I feel like this painting has a very illustrative quality and just a sweet quality. And I almost kind of wish it didn't have a big fold in the middle of it, but if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have had that cool symmetrical ink blot to work from. The idea for adding the birds around her came a little bit later. At first I thought I might have like a big bouquet of flowers, like a bunch of flowers in her hair, and they would be like purple roses or something. But as I started to see the other shapes around, I thought, boy, they kind of look like hummingbirds darting in and around, and just I thought that was nice and lively and fun. And so I'm using some purple, both some like dioxazine violet and some interference metallic acrylic gouache purple, to just kind of flesh in some of these shapes, and just pretty much let the ink splots dictate what's going to happen. Something that I've been noticing when I watch, good art journalers is that they can take like a splat or a messy page, or kind of like a, they can wipe their palette on a page, and then a few days later or a few months later turn it into something nice. And I think that's a really useful tool. The painter Moreau, who is a famous abstract painter, would take his wife's, when his wife came back from the grocery store, would take like the meat wrappings and wipe it on his canvas. So, because he hated to look at a white canvas. And that's kind of what I think happens here. It's when you have a jumping off point, it's easier to be creative when you have some restraints, I think. And when you have a white page in front of you, there's no restraints. You have the whole world's your oyster, and that can be very intimidating. But if you have kind of like a smear here or there, it gives you a starting off point, and it doesn't feel so precious anymore. I think a white canvas or a white piece of paper can just feel way too precious. So here I'm adding a little bit of pink to the cheeks, and I find just adding a little bit of color and then smearing it out with a damp brush or my finger works really well to give you just a subtle blush. I think the thing that has kept me from using acrylics much in the past is that I always felt they were very limiting, and I kind of had to get it right the first time, or there was just no blending in and I had to repaint everything. But you can definitely work in glazes and just kind of get a little paint and smudge it around just to, you know, alter it the way you want. I wanted some more shading on the face because I do want to accentuate that bit of foreshortening I have with her head tip down. And so I did go a little bit under the cheekbones and under the nose, and I'm just kind of adding a little bit of paint and blending as I go. One thing that was kind of interesting that happened when I was putting my paint out was that I don't use acrylics very often, and I had some tubes of acrylic just sitting in a drawer, and they've been there for probably unused for like a year. And when I squirted some out, I got just binder. So I got this clear liquid. And so I'm like, So then I closed the tube back up and I shook it, and I was able to mix up the rest of that paint. But then I used that binder, the clear liquid. It was like the perfect blending medium to help blend some of these colors together or to make a glaze. So I was able to use that to my advantage. So if that ever happens to you, kind of save that off into its own well and dip into that instead of water, and you can end up getting some nice translucent glazing without underbinding your paint. I don't really think you have to worry about that so much on paper because paper is more absorbent, but definitely, you know, you have to worry about underbinding acrylic in canvas. So, you know, here I'm going in, I added a little bit of white to my mix, and I'm just kind of adding in some highlights and just kind of spreading it around. As you could see, I'm kind of clumsy with my acrylic paint use. I get too much in, and then I have to go in and spread it around a little bit. These are dedicated acrylic brushes. I know that clear handle there, it looks like my watercolor ones, but I don't use my watercolor brushes for acrylic. But it doesn't hurt to have like a spare set of Aqualon brushes for use with acrylic paints. Those brushes have an acrylic handle. They're made by Royal and Langnickel. I like them for watercolors. I really like them for beginner watercolorists, since, you know, if you accidentally leave them in the water overnight, which, come to think of it, my bucket is full of water and brushes downstairs. I have to remember when I'm editing this to go downstairs and take care of my brushes. But I like it because if you forget about it, you get distracted like I do, you're not going to ruin your brush. So they're a very robust, resilient brush, and they do handle acrylics really well, especially if you're using more of the soft body acrylic that a lot of mixed media artists use, either your craft acrylic or, you know, like the soft body or flow acrylics. When you're doing the lips, I recommend doing the top lip a little darker than the bottom lip, since the bottom lip tends to pick up a highlight and the top lip tends to be more in the shadow. And I'm going in and adding some details on the birds, giving some like, I'm adding like little sparks of yellow next to the purple just to make them appear more vibrant, also like beaks. And if I want to put some legs, and I could do that in purple. The weird little splotches at the top of her head, I thought, oh, that would be kind of cool to make like maybe butterflies kind of floating in. So I kind of sketched those in. And this is a paint over pen, which is an opaque white acrylic pen made by Jane Davenport. And I just kind of dabbed some of that in and smeared it around too. And that just gives you a really, really subtle white highlight that is really easy to integrate on top of acrylic paint. So you don't have to go in with a brush and paint and then fuss with working it in. So it's really nice for those final details. And I did go in over some of the birds with the paint over pens. I haven't had like awesome luck with acrylic paint pens, but I do like these. I don't know how long they're going to last. I've had them since January. I've used them a bit, not like a ton, but they're still going strong. So I'm pretty hopeful about that, that they'll continue to serve me. I'm using alcohol markers here, and you do need to be careful going over acrylics with alcohol markers because alcohol will dissolve acrylic paint. So these are very inexpensive markers I'm using. I wouldn't do this with my Copics. I wouldn't do this with any markers that I wouldn't be able to replace, but I think they're kind of fun. You can use them even if you do have nice ones. Just don't go over the acrylic, and you won't have a problem. What happens is it dissolves some of the acrylic, and then it can clog up the nib. It's the same reason you don't want to go over colored pencils with your acrylic markers, because it will dissolve the wax and it could clog up your nib. So I am having fun with this technique. I am making sure I scribble off my marker on a scrap of paper when I am done. I have some off camera that I'm using. So I just don't want you to pick up a bad habit from this video. Want to let you know these are spare markers. I am scribbling them off. Don't do it with expensive markers, but it is kind of it is a fun effect. It's a great way to pull in some sharpness without having to get in with a brush where you might be a little bit messy. It's just because it's so transparent. It's a wonderful way just to tint, like add a little more pink to the cheeks, add a little bit more blush to the lips. And it's just a really fun technique. And like I said, with art journaling, I definitely go by instinct more than anything. It's definitely more of like a playtime than a serious art time for me. And that's why I can't narrate it in real time, because I'm just, figuring it out as I go along. So now I'm grabbing some watercolors. I know the watercolor, if I get it on top of the acrylic and I don't like it, I can just wipe it right off because it's not going to bind to the acrylic. And so I can just go in and put a background in really easily this way. You could also have like collaged on your paper before you started all the acrylic painting. I really was just having fun, and paint is just a really direct way for me to go in and do that. And yeah, and those are the Jane Davenport watercolors and the Jane Davenport brush there that's pretty brand new. The watercolors aren't, the watercolors are from January. And I'm just adding a couple shades of blue there, and basically just having a good time with it. I like the idea of clouds around her, but when I just had the white and the blue, it didn't look complete enough, so I decided to go with 2 shades of blue so that I could still have that look of clouds, but fill everything up. I didn't like the look of the white on the paper with this technique. And again, touching up again with the alcohol pens, kind of bringing in some dark details where I felt like I needed them, and drawing on any other little doodads and what have yous, I guess. I thought that the birds looked a little weird hovered, so I thought I would put a nest under them and carry that nest down over the hair a little bit more. So I'm just going in with that leftover unbleached titanium and burnt sienna, which actually looks more like burnt umber. So maybe I did have burnt umber there because it looks a little bit colder than burnt sienna. But anyway, that's what I'm using for the nest. And if I am going to go over, I do want to let you know, if I am going to go over with like a marker on top of acrylic paint, I do stop and dry it, or I stop the camera and let it dry, because if I was picking up wet paint with those markers, they would be toast. And throwing in a little bit more shadow in the hair. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm doing something because it makes the picture better, or because I don't want to waste the paint. So that's a bad habit too, but I actually do think that darker shadow in the hair makes it look a little bit better. After I was done this, I actually had some leftover yellow paint and I put that in the hair, and that did not make it look better, but luckily the painting was done and photographed, and I was good with that. But hey, it's just a experimentation. And here I'll show you a little bit of a close-up on the page. It was a lot of fun to make. I love that I could rescue something that was honestly headed for just the bin, basically. I hope you enjoyed this. If so, please give me a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time with another Inktober project, probably. Happy crafting!